Greetings and salutations. Welcome to Selnar's Minis. Today I'm going to be painting up a ghost from the Nighthaunt range. And to do this, I'm going to use a lot of paints. And these paints are showing up on the screen right at this moment. But most importantly, I'm going to be using some UV glow-in-the-dark paints because there is nothing spookier than having the lights turn out and having your ghost seen on the field, or using a UV light so you can show everybody without having to turn off the lights how spooky they really are. Please take a moment to like this video and to subscribe to my channel so that you can see what I do in the future. But I will say, and you will see this towards the later end of this video, that this is a good example of it's okay. It's okay to make mistakes. It's just paint. You can fix it. And this will be made clear a little bit later. So I was really excited about these UV / glow in the dark paints because, you know, it kind of epitomizes the whole ghosts, you know, you see in the movies or you see in pictures, just like glowing ghosts floating through. And that's kind of what I wanted to like bring forth in this model. So I'm going to start off with the top hood of the ghost, and I'm going to use Snake Scale Green from Army Painter. And this is just to give me kind of a mid to darkish colored green on the hood. And I had planned on using a different color for the actual rest of the shroud that you can see below it. So in this clip, I'm just going to put on the first layer. I end up putting on several other layers to get good coverage. You may notice in the video that there is various different colors of primer on this model, and I did this on purpose. So I have the gray for the mid to light green that I chose for the hood, and then I have white for the arms and the shroud, and then black for the more solid objects, which is the skull, the chain, and the ball, and the axe. So I'm going to go ahead and paint this, and then when we get to the next stage, I will be back on. So the next thing I decided to paint was the skull of this particular haunt. For this I used Army Painter's Skeleton Bone. I'm just going to go ahead and try to get good coverage. Again, I end up doing 2 coats of this in order to get really good coverage. But once we're done here, we'll keep on talking at you. Keeping in theme with the tan colors, and even though it's slightly off film and, well, also there's a piece of hair there, but also out of focus, I decided to work on the handle of the axe. I went for kind of a lighter wood, so I used Vallejo's Khaki on this. I'm being a little bit messy here, but it's early in the stage, so anything that I kind of paint over that I'm not supposed to, it's easy enough to fix up at this point. After finishing the axe handle, I moved on to the metal bits on the model. For this, I used Necromancer Cloak from Army Painter. Just went around and added just the dark gray to all these regions. I'll come back and do some more things with it later, but at this point it's just laying down some groundwork colors. As you can see, I'm just going around and cleaning up where the Khaki had touched areas I didn't really necessarily want to be that color, so I'm just going through and cleaning it up. And I will end up having to do this with this color as well on some of the other areas. Fortunately, I touched various areas when I was painting the chain and the ball. Up next, I started to paint the ghost arms on the miniature. For this, I used Gorgon Hide from Army Painter. It's a nice light blue, almost whitish looking blue. Will go great with this model overall. And here's where I began to paint the shroud. This is a very light green. It's called Kraken Skin by Army Painter, and I will end up doing multiple layers of this. You will not see me do all of them on camera. I believe this is just the first layer that you see. And I'm going to go around and paint this on all remaining shroud. I am super excited at this stage because I am setting down the groundwork for what I want to do ultimately with this model. Most of where I want to put the glow in the dark is going to be in the shroud. Some of it is going to be in the arms, and very little of it is going to be in the cloak hood of this ghost. So I'm just going to go around and paint this, and when I start getting into other stages, I'll pop back on. Alright, so after I had finished applying the Kraken Skin to the lower shroud, I went ahead and started to weather up my metals. For this, I used Cream Coat's Iron Oxide, some nice kind of rusty looking brown, and I'm just going to go ahead and apply this by a stippling motion to all the areas that are metal, the axe head, the chains, and the ball. Once I'm done with this, and you guys can see what I'm doing here, I'll chime back in and we'll talk about the next stage. All right? Once I finished with the Iron Oxide, I decided to brighten up the rust a little bit by adding in another color. I realized that this color was not added into the turnaround of the paints, so I will make sure it is in the description of the video. But this is Reaper Miniatures Rusty Anchor. And I'm just going to go ahead and stipple this here and there to provide a little bit more color variation to this model. After I finished that, I decided I need to start to bring up the glow-in-the-dark aspect of this model. So I started to mix in the Fantastory neon green UV glow-in-the-dark paint to both the Kraken Skin and the snake scales from Army Painter. I had played around with these in advance on a piece of paper. They did work mixed together when I was doing my test runs on the paper. And so I started off with 2 parts Kraken Skin from Army Painter and 1 part of the neon green. And I went ahead and hit all the highlighted areas, or I should say the raised areas that I was going to highlight, like the folds in the shroud and the tips of the wisps of the shroud in the lower half of the ghost. I in turn did the same thing with the snake scales and the neon green. So I'm going to add 2 parts snake scales to 1 part neon green. And again, I'm just hitting all the flat and high folded areas on the upper cloak / shroud. And as you can see though, I'm starting to have some difficulties with this paint. I noticed that it didn't dry nearly as quickly as the Army Painter paints. And so I had to be kind of careful. And if I noticed that there was some tearing of the paint, I would stop and add a little bit of water to my brush and kind of moisten it back up and smooth it back out. You can see it again there. It's just kind of a quick tear that I was just like, I'll go back and fix that in a moment. But this is 1-to-1 ratio of Kraken Skin to the neon green. And again, my areas are just getting a little bit smaller. I'm just trying to hit like the raised areas, the flat areas, the trailing wisps of the lower shroud. The idea was to build this glow-in-the-dark aspect up so that you would see more towards the end if you put a neon light, UV light on it, or if it was in the dark. And then I went ahead and I decided that in order to let things dry a little bit more, I would go ahead and apply Agrax Earthshade to the skull, the axe, and all the metal bits to make them look a little bit more rusted. And so after I did the shading, please forgive the blurriness. While I'm getting the figure more into the field of view, sometimes the camera likes to focus on other things, such as my fingers and the pokey tool in the back. So here we are, I'm looking at it, showing what I'm doing. At this point, I'm like 2 parts glow in the dark, 1 part Kraken Skin. And I say to myself, you know, I really should check this out, see how this is working out. And so I went ahead and I did this layer, and I believe I set it down and let it dry and let it underneath the light so it could absorb some energy. And I decided to take it into the closet and take a look at it to see how well the glow in the dark is going. And it did not glow. And I was like, oh, this is not going to work. So I said, maybe I just didn't leave it underneath the lamp long enough while it was drying so we can see what's going on. And so I left it underneath the lamp for 40 minutes. And I went back into the closet. And it barely glowed. So, and as you can see, as I'm painting here, because it's not drying quickly and it takes time for it to dry, the previous layer actually started to peel a little bit. So I said to myself, this is not working. We need to rethink this. I need to take a moment, step back, and refigure and rejigger. So I'm gonna continue to paint this, because at this point, this is before I took it into the closet. I was still working on 2 parts glow in the dark and 1 part Kraken Skin. Now, I did this next sensible thing. Even though I practiced with it on a piece of paper, which was white, hence the white primer, I still looked it up, and come to find out, this particular paint does not do well by mixing it with other paints. This is why I was having difficulties getting the look that I wanted. So this is something I'll keep in mind for next time. The next time I use these paints, I will make sure to use them over just white and nothing else with them. But that does not solve the problem I have currently at this time. So I did film what I did next, however, it was so blurry and off the screen that for most of it, that it wasn't very helpful. So what I ended up doing was taking Army Painter's Ash Gray and painting over all of the shroud. This was in preparation for what I had in mind. So while I was busy looking things up and realizing it wasn't going to work, I had to think about what I wanted to do for the bottom part of the shroud. I no longer could do a glow-in-the-dark look, or in my mind, at least at this stage, I felt like I couldn't, just because I needed to experiment more with the paint itself. I decided to use some new paints I got, which are Army Painter's speed paints. So I painted the lower shroud in light gray, and then did a dry brush of white over that. Now, mind you, some of that dry brushing meant that I had to fix some bits on the chains and on the ball in order to make them look the way they did before. I didn't bother to record the repairs portions of that. And I went ahead and applied 2 layers of the speed paint. I allowed it to dry once. I felt that I could see the gray through it a little too much, and went ahead and applied a second layer. And after that, what I did, in order to get the highlights, as you can see me starting to work with them here, is I started adding small amounts of the ash gray into the color that I used, which was Occultist Robe for the speed paint. So this initial set of me highlighting is a 2-to-1 ratio of Occultist Cloak to the ash gray from Army Painter. And I'm just going to go around and start to highlight things down and slowly make it look a little bit better. And as I go, I start to add more and more ash gray to it. So the next layer that I do will be a 1-to-1 Occultist Cloak to ash gray, and then a 2-to-1 ash gray to Occultist Cloak, and then I think my final highlight is like 3 parts ash gray to Occultist Cloak. I have to say I'm fairly happy with the speed paint. It dried pretty quickly. It did not reactivate when I used it, unlike the previous version. So this is Speed Paint 2.0 that I'm using. And I just went around and just made it look like a little bit more of a torn burial shroud than like a wispy ethereal shroud. I then, after I was done with all this, decided to move on to the upper hood / cloak. Of doing the upper hood area, I reapplied the Army Painter snake scales over the entire hood, and in the shadowed recessed areas I applied Army Painter's Moldy Cloths. After I was done with that, I started the highlights. For this, I did 1 part snake scales to 1 part jungle green, and again paid attention to the large flat areas and the creases, the upper portions of the creases on the hood. From there I added another part of jungle green, so it would be 1 part snake scales and 2 parts jungle green to get a slightly brighter color. And then for my final highlight, I added to the mixture of 1 part snake scales and 2 parts jungle green, I added 1 part Maggot Skin from Reaper Miniatures to get my brightest highlights. So while I go around and do all these different highlights, I just want to take a moment to talk about what went well and what went wrong with this whole process. So I think that the idea was pretty solid, even though my understanding of the paint was not complete. I think I will try something like this again in the future with a different model. But I think what really went well was the recovery of the entire miniature painting. Going from, oh, well, it's not working. It's really easy to be like, oh, well, I guess we're not going to do this because it's not working, so I'm just going to set this off to the side and not finish it. Instead, I started thinking about colors that would go well with the lighter green hood and what would make it still look pretty good on the table as far as a ghost goes. Yeah, it's not glow in the dark, it's not UV reactive, but that's okay. This is the thing that I talk about. It's okay. It's just paint. You can fix it. And I did. This is what I did in order to fix it, in order to make it work. So I'm just going to go around and paint the upper hood with the colors that I talked about. And then when I get to the skin, I'll get back on and we'll talk some more. Alright, so now we're going to talk about the arms. So there is some repair that has to happen. I have gotten colors on the skin without trying to. Little accidents here and there. So I'm going to go ahead and reapply the Gorgon Hide to the areas that have been affected by other paints. And then after that, I'm going to add a little bit of matte white to the Gorgon Hide to lighten it up and start to provide my highlights. Again, this is a ghost, so I'm going for pretty bright on the arms that essentially don't exist in the mortal realm, but you can see them because they're holding things, or the ghost has got enough energy to be seen. Basically, the things that I see that are real in my mind's eye is the skull, the hood, the shroud at this point, the chains, and the axe. The rest of it is spectral, so to speak. So I'm going to go ahead and provide highlights to all the regions that need it with the 1-to-1 ratio of Gorgon Hide and white. And then I'm going to go around and provide a second highlight, which is going to be 1 part Gorgon Hide to 2 parts matte white, and go ahead and do this again. And then I also, during this time while I was waiting things to dry, I added a little bit of Dungeon Gray and Ash Gray to the chain and the axe to start to highlight up the metals. And after I get that done, in order to make it look a little bit rusty again, I will go ahead and apply Fuegan Orange wash from Games Workshop to those areas. So we're going to go ahead and walk through this. You'll see me do this, and then when we're done, it'll be a turnaround, and I'll talk to you briefly again at that point. All right. Right, so here's the finished product, even after all the things that happened and having to start over. So I'm fairly happy in how this turned out. Please like this video and subscribe. It'll help me grow as a channel. It'll allow me to be more motivated to put more of these kind of videos out. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you think about this. Once again, this is a Nighthaunt model that I'm using as a ghost. Alright, well, thank you very much, and I will see you next time. Bye.